watch in the country. And Laura's going to give us an overview, I think, of what's going on in our incubator and the efforts, entrepreneurial efforts on campus. So thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you very much for having me. His company is one of our clients in the incubator, so I'll talk a little bit about some of the examples of innovation coming out of the university and some of their path towards commercialization. As was described, I'm the director of the Research Park, which I'll tell you a little bit broadly about the context of what's here and then the incubator within it. The Research Park is located the exact opposite side of campus, but contiguous with campus. It is an area with about 90 companies, both a mixture of large corporations and startup companies. We started in 2001, so compared to some of the other research parks in the U.S., we're relatively new, but there are new ones popping up all over the place, all over the world, all the time, and this has become a growing area of economic development. So the area itself is pretty large. We're up here at the top of this map at the Beckman Institute, and there are 14 buildings, of which one of them is the incubator facility. As I mentioned, research parks are all over the U.S., so if you're coming from another university in the U.S., it's a good chance that your university might be either contemplating or already have one. Around the world, there are something around the magnitude of 800 research parks now associated with universities. So there may be resources that are on your own campuses as well that have some similarities. And one of the reasons that they're successful is this combination often of corporations and startup companies co-located together in conjunction with the university. And that helps to hopefully to bring better commercialization to the work coming out of the university, both for students who want to work in these companies or for the entrepreneurs that are seeking validation of the commercial potential that they have. Our companies are twofold in terms of non-startup companies. The larger corporations either are very student-centric, where they have a lot of students working year-round during their operations, or are engineering centers located for companies. The students do work year-round and they make good wages, so that's a possibility of how some of our students are engaged in the university. But today I'll focus on Enterprise Works, which is the incubator, and this facility opened in 2003. It was funded by the state of Illinois, and we've had about 160 startups go through the incubator since it opened. The distribution of companies is pretty broad. This university is a large university, so although this series is focusing on optics, and I'll point out a couple of companies in that specific space, the companies that we serve are all over, from life sciences to software companies to clean tech companies, and we have really focused on our resources being aimed at the commercialization of scientific-based startup companies, because that's what they have in common, is they're taking research that in many cases was 10 years in the making at the university and then trying to get it to market. And there are some similarities of all those types of companies as they try to move from a research environment to one where they're actually getting into selling to customers. So some of the programs that we have, I'll describe to you in just a little bit of how we help our companies here at the University of Illinois and some of the reasons why we do this. The first is a program called iStart. So iStart is a program we launched a few years ago with the notion that it was hard for companies to get started. And we were talking to the same professors or grad students in many cases for years, and they hadn't taken the leap to actually start a company because it's daunting. There are a lot of things that you need to do. In the beginning stages of a company, it's often the case that you need professional help, and as a one-person operation, it's going to be extremely daunting of all the things that are needed. And I'll just walk through a few of the types of things that we commonly are addressing with companies in the beginning. This program essentially takes companies in before they're ever formed, and we look at them with a team of folks on our side to determine whether we think they have high probability of success, and we'll fund up to 90% of their costs in the first year of operations. Whether it's started by a grad student or started by a professor, this takes the leap to say, even though you haven't formed yet, we think you have good potential, and we want to make it easier for you to do that so that you can get some help. So one of the first buckets of things that happens is legal. Most companies need to actually form, and if you're going to go after SBIR funding, this is one of the early drivers, is that you're seeking a DUNS registration number and a federal identification number, and so formation is required. Well, you could form online with LegalZoom or something like that, or take yourself to the county clerk's office and form. That's probably not best for your long-term future of the company, because outside of SBIR funding, there may be implications of future funding that's going to require formation to be done properly. And then I'll put the next bucket down as some things that also come up very commonly, which is stock option plans and corporate governance for a new startup. Many of you may be grad students. We have seen a combination often of students and faculty working together, or people who've just moved outside of the university, and Jen will talk to you more about student startups, where these issues of ownership in the company and how you invest over time become really important because the people change over time. And that's one thing that we know has become pretty constant. The leadership of the company has changed, the faculty members' role in the company may change, the students involved in the company may change. So setting up the legal structure up front is important. Other things like non-disclosure agreements, because often we want you to start talking to customers, and to do so you might want to have NDAs in place as an example so that you can have open discussions with them. And I'll come back to that topic. Business planning is also really important for the companies. One of the items on here that we see as really important is doing market research very fully up front, so that you understand the market that you're about to sell in, that you have accurate numbers about the market you're about to get into, and you understand the other startups that are in that space, exits that have happened in that space, and other conditions that will allow you to be really an expert in that field, not just from a research or a technology standpoint, but the business that you're about to enter into, and to focus your market. One of the biggest things that we tend to see with research coming out of the university is that from a research standpoint, it's really good to show it has broad implications of applying to lots and lots of markets. But for a startup company, often they need to choose one market to focus on and pursue that aggressively and make sure that they actually get customer traction in that space before trying to do everything. Because you will be a limited team as a startup company, and trying to do everything usually means not being as successful in any of them. The other area that we tend to address is SBIR assistance, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Many of our companies do apply for this funding. It's federal funding. And then accounting is the next sort of major bucket that we have, which is it often is a problem that the companies are set up. They're keeping all their numbers in Excel, and then they don't have them prepared for investors. They don't have them prepared for corporate partners that they'll have in the future. And so keeping your financial house in order is really important. And it even has legal implications if you don't do payroll correctly, as an example, because of tax requirements that you have as an employer. Probably that gives you a sense of why we said this all takes a lot of work, and people were having to fund it out of pocket in many cases because they hadn't raised money yet. So we wanted to make it really accessible and negotiated rates with providers. And then a variety of other things that we'll choose to fund upon occasion. All the while, many of the companies are not yet formed, as I had said, that they need to be thinking about their market. I'm sure Jen will talk to you more about ICOR. We're really pleased that this university is one of 10 sites in the United States that the National Science Foundation funded for ICOR. Gabby's company went through the national version of this, and our site version has had now 30 teams go through it since last summer. The idea is that grad students partially are very important in the companies, and that they play usually the role of being the first employee of the company, or a postdoc that emerges from a university often is the first employee of the company. And some of the things to prepare them to be entrepreneurs require understanding the market, as we just talked about. So faculty member and grad student usually are the teams that we're addressing here on this campus. And what they're doing is they're going out and getting feedback over an 8-week period of time from customers. So it shows that kind of a cycle, this lean startup philosophy that is taking hold, and a lot of the training we've done in entrepreneurship focuses on this. That rather than just think about what your technology is and speculate what the market might be for that, go out and talk to customers often and iterate your business as a result. So rather than trying to have you develop a really in-depth business plan that's 40 or 50 pages up front, find out if anybody's actually going to pay for what you have, and who seems most likely to pay for what you have, and how much are they willing to pay for it. Because if you don't know those things up front, you might be having a lot of invalid assumptions in your business plan, and we want you to make sure there's some traction before you ever get going, or maybe it's not ready to leave the university yet, or maybe it's not an appropriate technology to your market. I pointed out Jed in the back already, referencing him. He can raise his hand when he's speaking. He's one of our entrepreneurs in residence, our most requested entrepreneur in residence, I can say. When he first started joining us as one of the now 7 that we have as part of our team, he was working for a company called Pattern Insight that was one of our clients in the research part and the incubator, and it sold. He did a lot of great work on customer development at that time for Innos, a company that emerged out of the university, and now helps many of the faculty and members and grad students out of the university with commercializing their technology. But we have a whole team. So anybody from the university who wants assistance thinking about their company can get free access to one of the consultants that we hire. They're all working for us on a part-time basis, but we know that many people don't have business experience and need somebody who does. Who's done a startup company before, can give them candid feedback about what they should be doing in terms of milestones, or can tell them that their baby's ugly or something like that, that they need sometimes this direction that's not coming from the university. But also to tell them that there may be a really great opportunity in helping them achieve that goal by setting up better customer discussions, helping to negotiate contracts, terms that they might get from a VC that they want somebody else to look at to make sure that they seem plausible, or that can help them negotiate various aspects of what's going to happen in their startup company. So that's the role that EIRs play. They meet with about 130 companies or prospective companies, entrepreneurs a year. So we're seeing a lot of volume of startup activity out of this campus that may or may not ever form an actual company, but having the access to have that conversation we found really important. Another thing that we started doing was a designer in residence program. And this, for if you're building physical devices, can be really important, especially in, say, the medical space or other application areas where the physical form it takes needs to be responsive to the user that will be interacting with it. So we have a program that provides free design assistance to the companies. It's coordinated through industrial design here at the university, and we have students that are helping as well. And so we're trying to build better, more engaging user interfaces, whether that's software or whether that's a physical device that's being created. I mentioned SBIR assistance, so I don't know, show of hands who's heard of SBIR. I think most of you know something about that maybe. So about 3% of the federal agency budgets that are for research are set aside, so Department of Defense, NSF, NIH as examples of some of the big funders will set aside 3% of their research budget to be awarded to startup companies. And so that helps to fund lots of new ventures coming out of universities. University entrepreneurs tend to be very well prepared or aligned with the goals of that program, but it's not as simple as just applying. There are a lot of things that they're seeking. They want to see a highly qualified PI, so somebody who's high caliber, who has the right publications or expertise in their field to really be doing innovative research. And they're also seeking a strong commercialization prospect. For our companies, we're seeing a lot more emphasis on that. They shouldn't just be applying up front to extend their research, but really have to be thinking about the commercialization aspects. So in our incubator, the companies have received about $50 million in funding through this program, with about 200 awards to our companies. And one of the things that we're most proud of is the success ratio of going from phase 1 to phase 2. So a phase 1 award will fund you for about 6 months to do feasibility. In many cases, that's already well underway at the time you're applying, but it's a way to get you going and get into the program. And then you'll have an opportunity, if you're successful in phase 1, to apply for a phase 2 award, which can be somewhere around $750,000 or $1 million, which is a lot better funding. And that takes you for about 2 years to do some sort of proof of concept, getting an actual product closer to market. So our companies have about an 80% conversion rate going from phase 1 to phase 2, which is very high. Some of the national data I saw says it would be closer to 35 or 40% nationally for that rate. It depends on the agency. So I mentioned with that, we do help a lot of people with their SBIR applications. It's one of the services we provide. One of the things I'll just note on SBIR funding, if you do choose to pursue it, the actual writing about the technology seems very natural. It seems for most of our clients and academics. The difficult areas are you are required to have a commercialization plan. The first stage is just a one-page. Then the second stage is a lot more in-depth. They'll want customer letters of support in many cases, or venture capital interest to be shown. And so having those conversations at some point so that you can address how you'll be funded long-term. NSF in particular seems pretty concerned about where you are in the licensing process with the university, so having that as clean as you can going into it, or having a letter of support, or at least having had a disclosure made in a conversation about doing a startup company before you choose to do SBIR funding. And another area is the budget overall. So most universities have a grants office that helps you, or a business manager that helps you when you're applying for federal funding as a university unit. But a challenge for a startup company often is it's really all on them at that point. It is the startup company that's applying for the funding and responsible for creating their indirect cost recovery rates and other elements that go into the budget. So it's one of the things we try to help with, and also preparing companies if they're going to go through audit, that they're set up properly. So another aspect we realized is that there are lots of students who are interested in entrepreneurship, and we thought one way that we could help companies was to employ students directly that become a shared team that then can help all of our startup companies. So we employ 15 students that do projects for the companies at no cost. So if somebody needs a new website, or they want a logo, or they want market research data, or they want some sort of illustration done for them, graphic design is actually the most requested service we have. So we employ students from a variety of areas of campus that have skills that they can bring to startup companies so that you're not necessarily having to employ all those people directly, and that you can help also develop the students essentially through this activity as they acquire more entrepreneurial skills themselves. For example, one of our students, a computer science student at the University of Illinois, and I'm very sad, just graduated because we hired him his freshman year. And he has now done the websites for 28 startup companies that have come through our incubator. So his footprint is certainly all over the place, but it certainly helped a lot of the companies get a presence online, and it was one more thing that they didn't have to necessarily all do on their own. So many of the companies need to raise money, and raising money is a lot more challenging than many first-time entrepreneurs may realize. We have tried to set up a number of resources here at the University of Illinois to assist. We have our own venture capital fund called Illinois Ventures, which has about $65 million under management and is invested in a number of companies that have emerged from our incubator and university. But beyond that, many of the companies have raised money from other sources. There's another venture capital firm, the Research Park, that got started because one of our companies that was doing self-sorting microfluidics type of work sold to Sony. 2 people got pretty wealthy off of that and decided to start their own fund. And now they've been one of the more prolific investors in startup companies out of the university. That happened just a few years ago. But the companies have raised money from a variety of sources. Some of the things that we often see is that it takes a lot longer than most folks will anticipate. The expectations of how far along you are as a company can vary a lot by different investor, but certainly having early stage revenue into the company and showing that there's commercial interest already is one of the fundamentals, beyond it being really interesting technology and high profile. Even if it's coming out of a university and has a lot of credibility as a university research, it really needs to show that it's going to have revenue potential for the investors to be interested. But all that being said, the companies have raised $722 million in venture capital funding that have come out of our incubator, or that are either in our incubator or have been there since it opened in 2003. So despite being in Champaign-Urbana, I would say that we've had a lot of success. And so for wherever you're from, it's not impossible to raise money. It may be more challenging if you're not in a market like San Francisco or Boston to find those resources, but they are possible, and the companies have certainly been able to do so. Another thing that's important with venture funding is to understand how much money you will need. As a software company, you may not need that much funding. You might even be able to get by with bootstrapping or angel investment funding or something like that, or even just an A round of funding, and then be off to the races and making money. For a clean tech company, completely the opposite. Really capital intensive types of deal flow. In many cases, they're going to need somewhere above $50 million in venture capital funding. And I'll say it's a big challenge. One of the things that we're hearing is a lot of medical, therapeutics types of companies, even device companies in clean tech are becoming pretty adverse to some of the VCs to want to fund because of the enormous amount of capital and follow-on that will be needed. Clean tech, I'd say, is the hardest one right now, that once they get to a B round of funding, there's just not a lot out there because it's still pre-revenue, and it's going to take a lot of money to get it to the point where it's ready to be making money for that or an exit. Our companies get started in offices and labs, and we have a combination of both. A good problem, but nonetheless a little bit of a problem we're having right now is we've gotten really full, so we're doing our best to accommodate different space. But I'll say it's been great to see the amount of interest from our university in entrepreneurship. We also have co-working space. A lot of metropolitan areas, big urban environments, you'll have more shared space than dedicated space and incubator types of settings. So we have some of that as well. I'll note that lots of data-intensive companies need computing, and we can address that. We have lots of shared equipment that people can use that are in our incubator at no additional cost. And then we have procurement arrangements to use facilities on campus. We don't encourage the companies to replicate everything you would have in a building like this. Beckman Institute has some unique types of imaging or other capabilities that don't exist in many locations, and there's no reason not to tap into that. If we are at a university setting, you can set up facility use agreements and leverage the existing investments that have already been made. The fact that we have a lot of activities, we think training is really important, but we also think having fun is important. As a startup company, one of the things that maybe is underappreciated is that it can be kind of a lonely business. In many cases, they're, as I said, a one-man band running the operation from a day-to-day standpoint. So it's the one person that's trying to carry this company forward, wearing a lot of different hats, not only from a technical standpoint, but business standpoint. And and getting them to be able to interact with other entrepreneurs can hopefully help to keep them motivated, but also to learn from each other. So tomorrow night, if you're still in town, one of our big corporations, we have lots of them. One of them is Anheuser-Busch InBev. So we have the biggest beer company in the world doing research here, which is fun. And they are doing a big beer tasting of all their products tomorrow night at the research park. And we'll have the Craft Food Truck, which is awesome breakfast food that is often circling around this place. So if you want to come meet with entrepreneurs and see some of the corporations, you're welcome to come out. It's next to the Sony building on Oak Street and the pond at the research park. There are a lot of other resources that I'm not going to address. Jed made partially in his talk as well. We have an angel network here in our community. We have a great student competition that he'll tell you about. They have some work to help patent. And we have a Chicago Innovation Mentors program, which was designed after MIT's mentoring program, which is really best in class, to provide volunteers that help guide the companies. And that's mostly been around life sciences. We have a proof of concept funding program that our Office of Technology Management funds to help do about $75,000 in seed funding to companies. And we had a lot of coordination that we've tried to do across campus to bring entrepreneurial resources together. So lastly, I'll just go through a few startup examples. And Jed, if you want to interject on any of these, you've helped in any of them as well, so feel free to. The first one I'll mention is Apprentice. This company, you're going to be hearing from the Zeiss president tonight at dinner, I think. And what happened in this market is diffraction gratings that were used in major physics labs all around the world. There were 2 providers of those gratings. They had pretty old processes for doing so with Zeiss and Hitachi. Zeiss decided they didn't really want to be in that business, as I understand it, because it was a fairly small segment of their business and it hadn't really been modernized since post-World War II of the way that they were creating these gratings. Hitachi's factory in Japan was taken out during the earthquake in Japan, and they didn't choose to rebuild it. So there was a crisis amongst physics labs like Argonne National Lab that they needed these gratings to be created to be able to continue their research. So Professor Albamonte, who's a physics professor here, had a way to do this in a more modern approach, and he was able to create a new company that is now the sole manufacturer of the gratings. So for the 200 physics labs around the world that need these, he is the provider of choice, and it was great to see the National Science Foundation help him achieve that. And now they have, pilot production that's actually happening in our facility where they're able to create these gratings and sell them to the customers around the world. Biophotonics is a company that obviously you probably heard a little bit about. That is somebody who should look really. I guess I don't have you featured in the actual page. Catalin is the person who's now running this. It came out of Gabby's lab. The technology to be able to do live imaging of cells. They did go through the I-Core program, and I think hopefully one of the helpful things to them on that was being able to do more customer validation up front. They also are an NSF Phase 2 awardee, so they can tell you a little bit more about hopefully the SBIR process, and attracted both commercial interest in getting contracts underway, but also to get venture capital, a little bit of seed capital into the company up front to help them carry the business forward. Another that just won our COSAD competition is Luminous. So this is not optics in the sense of what's being addressed maybe here, but pretty neat in terms of visual impact. We have a lot of really good computer vision people at this university, and 3 grad students that were all PhDs in that area, had all done deals with different major corporations and developing technology with them in their prior experiences. Decided to, instead of taking a big corporate job, they were going to come together and form a company. And now they're doing projection mapping, which is a type of augmented reality that allows you to make things look like they're moving. It's a really cool, immersive retail environment or sports setting, or used at places like Disney to create theatrics around physical space. Another that's out of this building, the Beckman Institute has a lot of different medical applications that are already happening here around imaging. Professor Bopar is a professor that had done another company that had gotten funding and then decided that he had another application area that his postdoc wanted to pursue. So that's a new company called Photonicare. So Brian is the guy on the right, and he is, as I said, left being a postdoc to help form this company, and they just are moving into the incubator next week. They are developing a way to use OCT to do using better imaging of the ear. Ear infections are one of the most common afflictions of children, as an example, and they have very poor diagnostics. They basically use an old-fashioned otoscope to do that, and it's not a very good and precise way to determine whether somebody actually has an ear infection that just should be treated with amoxicillin, or whether they're going to need tubes or some other more invasive type of treatment. Another that used some optical technologies out of the university's Personify. So we had both somebody who was electrical computer engineering that had done a lot of work on CPUs, but also a professor that had been doing work with computer vision techniques using video. So what they did is they saw that the camera that was used for Microsoft Connect had a lot of application areas that were not really being pursued beyond gaming. So as soon as that came to market, they had developed the first software that could use it to be applied for a commercial purpose. And their commercial purpose is that you can use that little camera along with their software, and you can put yourself inside of content. So it creates a virtual green screen effect and motion capture with that as well. So this was very well received by a number of corporations. They received funding from both AMD and from Intel, which is pretty unusual. And Intel saw the potential of it being used for consumer applications, for chat, so something like Google Hangouts becoming more immersive with this. And AMD saw potential of this commercial sense where it's being used to be able to do better sales delivery. They've seen that their customers that use this platform to do sales from a B2B standpoint have increased their response rates by up to 40% when they use it. Another company that we've had that has recently gotten funding and a lot of interest is electronics. This came out of material science, and I put this one in just to mention something else, which is crowdfunding. So Kickstarter has helped a number of our companies get started. It's maybe not something you immediately consider as a possibility, but a lot of this is about the theatrics of how you do the campaign. And they were able to launch their business, which the professor moved from here to Harvard. She moved her business back here. It was a postdoc working for her, then moved his lab or their operations back to Champaign. And they launched a Kickstarter campaign in January and raised $674,000 in about a month's time to help them launch their company. Their goal was only $75,000, so this was a big deal that they were able to, $85,000, so it was a big deal that they were able to really exceed that expectation. And then I think my last one is Xerion. This also came out of this location, Beckman Institute. They are developing a way to speed up battery charging. This company has raised several $1 million. I won't say the exact number in angel funding. So in this case, I'd say it's a little different than going after venture capital funding. And another good consortium that they've developed is with the auto industry. So the ABC Coalition is the Automotive Battery Coalition that's helping to fund them with pooled money from across Ford and GM and some other interest areas. So collectively, that industry has an interest in trying to make electric vehicles more adapted by being able to charge the batteries faster. And so that's what's helping to fund this new venture. And I'll mention, just as Professor Gopart walked in and I mentioned serial entrepreneur out of the university, that sometimes once our faculty get successful with one, they might want to start another company. And we love seeing that. As an example, Professor Braun's now second company with Xerion. I think he's got another one up his sleeve yet. So love seeing that there's a potential to take that successful experience and seeing it applied in a new area where the technology was originally not conceived. So thank you very much for having me. Oh, I'm sorry. I did have one more I recommend that I should mention, and this is these are Tip Tech, is Professor Lining and Professor Geraldo, and they are developing a novel probe tip that can be used for AFM instruments, and it's more durable and lasts longer than they're already getting. Thanks.
Okay, any questions?
Doing things like what kind of grading we're talking about? So is that other companies are doing grading too, or?
The way I understand the judging from his instrumentation, which consists of a huge block of marble and steel, I think these are highly precision grading. Yeah, accuracy is down to the nanometer in terms of geodesics.
You may know more, Jed.
So what was the question about?
Are there other manufacturers of grading? My understanding is he's the only one who's making the type of gradings that they use that are very precise.
That is correct. My understanding is there's one or two companies that are trying to do this, but the stuff that Imprentice is doing is very, very specific, and there's nobody doing exactly what they're doing, which makes the customers very excited. So the interesting thing about what Imprentice is doing is they know every single person that buys gratings in the world, and every one of those customers in the world knows Peter Abamonte and Apprentice.
So it's not your regular visible grading, spectrometer.
Yeah.
I was wondering what kind of grading it is.
And his gradings are very specific and more accurate than any of the other ones, because he invented a new, novel way to do it. And so that's what he's trying to perfect right now, and he's perfected it in a very limited way, very limited scale, and now he's scaling it is what he's doing. If you get a chance, are you guys visiting Research Park, Gabby?
No.
Gabby,
Although
come on.
If you come out for a beer tomorrow night, you can stop
There
by
you
the
go.
incubator first and check out one of the
No,
labs.
we'll be at our hotel tonight for the backroom.
Oh, okay. If
Yeah.
you want to stop over before then, feel free to come check out the lab.
Hopefully you'll join us for.
Yes.
Right.
Later. I would say one of the things to keep in mind with that, though, and the judge is alluding to this, is that sometimes everybody's looking for a huge market potential, and sometimes a big market isn't necessarily the best one. I would say this company is probably one of the better aimed ones to get to successful profitability in our buildings, and it's a nice business for a smaller investor that's put money into it that sees a return that's probably likely to come quickly, because it's a very specific market that can be defined and the customers are known, the product can be priced, and you can get it successfully delivered, and then I would guess it'll be acquired by one of the bigger optics company that will see it as a pretty turnkey type of business to move into rather than having to develop it on their own. So sometimes it's better to go that path than trying to, as I said, do everything and try to enter into a massive category where the competition is pretty overwhelming. Thanks.
Other questions, please?
So I guess kind of similar to that. So what would be the advantage of doing a startup versus trying to sell an idea?
Well, you can license directly to companies. I'll say that one of the reasons why sometimes startup companies are formed out of the university is you can't license directly to the company because the technology readiness is not there. So they'll do a TRL score of some sort, and if they're seeking a TRL 7 or something like that that's merging out of the university at a 2 or a 3, they're not ready yet to be wanting to license it. So a way to develop it further is to form a company, and then that company gets it to the point where it advances, and then it might be acquired through that larger corporation. The tech transfer office of the university usually helps to make that assessment of whether it's fit for a startup company or whether they can market it and get it adapted into a company right up front. Depends on the space, whether or not somebody's actively looking for something right as it is, as it's still leaving the university. And then some of our companies, once they get started, will set up a sub-license agreement. So they might have a specific field of use where they are then going to give it exclusivity or some sort of an agreement for it to be used by another corporate partner. So it's not always seen all that favorably by some of the investors to do it, but for some of the companies that are bootstrapping, that can be a route to take something out of the university and then quickly thereafter sub-license it or do an arrangement for it to be used by a major corporation.
So this iForce program that we do from NSF. So once the company starts after the let's say second phase of SBIR, does the university own what's the share of the university or department from the company?
So I-4, usually teams are coming in pre-formation of company. By the time they get out of the program, we think they're usually pretty well prepared to go after SBIR funding, which means they've won. You really need to be a company to be able to pursue that funding. STTR, you can technically apply before being an entity, although it may not even be seen very favorably in that circumstance. PI can be a faculty member as an example. So SBIR funding usually exists. When you're going to start your company, then to your point, you're going to have to license out of the university. The terms for that, there are some standard term sheets for licensing on the university's website if you wanted to take a look. Most of them do get negotiated of some sort. The university's equity in the company, maybe say, I don't know, 5, 15% or something like that, depends on what's negotiated. And then there's usually some sort of royalties associated with future sales as well. And then there's an upfront issuance fee, which is usually around $10,000 to be able to get access to your technology. And the technology transfer offers can probably tell you more about that, but, or Jed, you can correct me if, those are somewhere around the ballpark in terms that I would see.
5 to 15% after the technology. But the thing is, it's a negotiation process. So what if the university says, oh, 50%, 60%, like after the technology segment, it's not?
They don't, they wouldn't go, depends on what you think is unreasonable. I would say that's unreasonable, and they're not gonna ask for that. It's gonna be in a ballpark of things that is in the range that I said. And there may be levers that, royalties are this, and so your equity goes down because you're giving more royalties in the future. It is, that's why I say it's somewhat of a process of negotiation. And the other thing is it depends on the technology area. So therapeutics, quite different than software or devices. How much research funding went into it? Is it a huge patent portfolio that you're licensing, or is it one single patent? Those are going to impact some of the negotiations. The software, in some cases, the patent is not as important. It's really copyright or continues to evolve quickly thereafter going into a company versus something that is developed with 15 years of research, is really unique and has 6 or 7 patents around it already. It's going to be a different type of negotiation usually.
I would add that the interest of the university kind of aligns well with those of the founders, and that is where the company is successful. So asking for 50% equity from a company, that would probably
Because I know some
destroy your company, right?
And I'll give one example of I'll knock on a little bit of a pure university. There's a program at University of Pennsylvania, so Penn's a great university. They've gotten a lot of attention for a program they have called Upstart, which we kind of knocked off to create iStart, I'll say, and give credit to, I like what they were doing as far as helping the companies with resources. But they take 51% ownership of all their companies. And that's by some rules that had already been developed at Penn, that the faculty members could not have ownership, majority ownership in their companies, and that something with the university essentially requiring ownership that I would say most other universities would consider very onerous. So it depends on the university and the rules that they have about technology transfer. Our university definitely has creation of startup companies as an objective, and so trying to create a way that they think they're creating fair terms for both parties. Their biggest reason for trying to do these negotiations and get as much as they can is the recruitment of patent costs. We spend about $5 million a year in patent costs at this university, and unfortunately that's a money loser in the university, despite whatever we've negotiated with startups and other corporations for licensing. And almost, I think it's 60% or more of major university tech transfer offices lose money every year.
Tell your friends not to go to Penn and come to get it. Other questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Laura. Okay, let's have a 10 minutes.